we were given a lot of responsibility to get over in that fields and, you know, chop cotton, hoe corn, and do that sort of thing. And
did you do any plowing?
I plowed all the time. You know, I could lay off rows, which, you know, a lot of people, laying off rows it took a technique, but I had learned to lay off rows. But you do that in the spring, you know, when you get ready to plant.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing you have to do in the spring of the year, and we had a turning plow, a steel beam turning plow, and you had to turn the whole fields. All your fields has to be turned. That means you go around and around and around, and you're turning about, you know, 8 to 12 inches with a turning plow.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I would do that. My dad, you know, I'd be 10, 11 years old. I could barely reach the top of the plow stalk. But I knew how to run, and the mule was pretty well trained. You know, was anything for him to eat out there when you're turning the fields. You just keep going around and around, and you start at daylight and you go to dark, because you got to do all your fields, you know. And we were probably, at that time, we were planting corn and cotton and beans. We were probably doing 20, 25 acres. Turning that much with a mule took a lot of time. You know, we might do that 7 days a week until we got it all turned. And once you got it all turned, and of course you had to cut all the sprouts. My dad would make us get out there and take an axe out there and cut any sprouts that come up and everything. And then when you got ready to plant, you'd have to lay off the rows. And they had to be a certain distance apart, and they had to be straight. You know, you had to know how to do that, because if you didn't, you run them close together, far apart. I mean, it was tacky looking, and it didn't make a very good crop. And usually my dad would lay off rows, but a lot of times when he was working and everything, he'd make it my responsibility, and we would lay off. I'd go and lay off rows, and we would get ready to plant. And usually we would plant corn on Good Friday, because that was we didn't go to school that day.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did go, if it was a day of school, we didn't go, because that day we had to. And the way we had to plant the corn was, one of us would have to take buckets, and we put fertilizer in the buckets. And you go down the row, and you put a bead of fertilizer in the rows, and then somebody walks behind with a bucket full of corn grain, and you drop 2 grains of corn in each hill that you go down through there. And once you do that, and you're doing that all day long, because you're planting several acres of corn. Once you got all that done, then we had a heel sweep that we used to cover it up, and that meant you ran down the furrow, the row, and it pulled dirt from both sides and covered it up. And then once you got that done, then you were through with it until the corn come up and got about knee high. And at that time, once the corn got about knee high, and then my dad would say, you got to go and chop the corn. And what you would do is, it would be times when there'd be too much corn, where you put too many grains of corn together, and he would want it thinned out, so that you would have a good strong crop, and you would thin out the runts, so to speak. The corn, it didn't look like it's doing very good, and you'd leave. And then you would take a hoe, and when you thinned it out, you would mound up around the bottom of the corn stalks you left in there, and then you would cut any grass that might be in the field and everything. And we would have to do that all over the field. And after that was done, you would give it a couple of weeks, and then you would lay it by. And to lay by the corn crop, they had to use hydrogen of soda. And you put soda down. You would take buckets. My brother and I had to take a bucket each, and we'd fill it up with that. And it was a thick granular that we used. And you would drop a little bit by each stalk.
Is that some kind of fertilizer?
Yeah, yeah. And we would put that down, and then my dad would follow with the mule, and he would sweep it. He would sweep dirt up on top of where you drop the soda, and then you would be laid by until the corn came in. Once it came in, of course, you would have the green corn, and we would pull a lot of that, and we would, of course, we would can it, we would eat it, while it was still green, roasting ears or whatever you want to call it. And then once it started to get hard, you just leave it in the field until maybe September. And it was hard enough then in September that you went back and pulled all the corn. You took a wagon. You went down the middle of the rows, between the rows, and you'd be on each side. You'd be pulling corn on one side and tossing the ears of corn in the wagon, and my brother, he'd be on the other side pulling, tossing corn in, and we'd go all the way down through it and pull all the corn. Once you got the wagon full, you'd have to take it to the house, and then put it in a corn crib, and then you go back and do the same thing until it may take you a few days to get all the corn, and hope it didn't rain, because once it got wet and everything, corn is awful hard to pull once it starts getting soggy and everything, and you want to do it before it got too cold, because you don't like pulling that corn in the cold. But that was kind of the way you did the corn crop. And sometimes my dad would have us strip the fodder before we pull the corn, and that would be when the corn, the leaves of the corn was turning brown. They hadn't turned brown yet. They were green and they're starting to turn brown, and that meant the crop was pretty well done then. You were not going to have any effect on it. And my dad would have us go and strip those leaves off, and put them in bundles. And you stick them on you'd be going down the row and you'd be stripping the leaves. And once you got a bundle, you tied it with one of the leaves. Corn leaves are pretty long, and you could tie it with that. And you would stick it up on top of one corn stalk, and you did that over the whole field. And then once you got that done, then you would go back and you would pull that fodder, and put it in the wagon and take it to the house and put it in the barn. And then it wasn't hay, but it was, the horses and cows and things, they loved that. It was a feed that they enjoyed, they did good with and all that, and we would have to do that sometimes. And of course, where we lived, and it was kind of hilly where we farmed, and it had terrace rows. Every acre or two, there'd be a big terrace row to keep it from eroding.